Right off of the big concept here as we look at Chapter 7, Section 2, and that is that the Constitution gives the executive branch the power to execute or implement the law. It is their job to carry out the laws that Congress passes, or to make them so. In terms we'll see, in terms of rights and responsibilities of the president. They do have certain policy responsibilities. A president can issue executive orders. The Emancipation Proclamation, that is the freeing of slaves behind enemy lines, is one of the most famous executive orders. The president did that. He didn't go through Congress. He didn't go through the Constitution of the Supreme Court. The Constitution gave him the right to pass an executive order, and he used that right to free slaves behind enemy lines. The president has the right to pardon. Law enforcement is generally carried out at the state level. And for the most part, the federal government allows law enforcement to be carried out at the state level. But occasionally there are federal matters, and the president does reserve the right to countermand or overrule a pardon or a lack of pardon on behalf of a state. So these are very important rights and responsibilities, and the others we'll get to. What I want us to think about is, should the president be the official commander of all the armed forces? And, ultimately the president is the highest ranking officer in the United States Armed Forces. And the question, again rhetorical, is should the president have that level of authority? Congress has limited that with some things that we'll get to, but ultimately the president is that supreme commander. Now, the source of the president's authority comes from the Constitution. The Articles, to be specific, Article 2 of the United States Constitution outlines the roles of the president. Now, the president of the United States is the only elected official that stands for election from the entire nation. The only one. Meadows is not elected by Charlotte. He's not elected by Raleigh. He's elected by the Western District. Tillis is not elected by Tennessee. He's elected by our half of North Carolina, and so on and so forth. The only person that is supposed to represent the entire nation as a whole is the President of the United States. And that is very significant. Okay, so what types of powers does the President have? They can obviously veto legislation, and they have exercised this right. I don't know, I don't have the records in front of me, but I'd almost bet that every president at some time or another has exercised the right to veto a law. So it goes through all the process, a bill to law, houses, gets to the president's desk, he can refuse to sign it. He can also call Congress into special session. So we learned when we studied Congress that they're only in session at particular times. And then they go into recess. They go and work in their districts. They meet people. They figure out what needs and concerns there are. They do research on those concerns, and they turn them into bills, all during the time that Congress is not in session. Because it's ultimately the job of our congressmen to represent us. So they have to spend time with us to figure out what we need. And then they go into session. For a few months out of each year, they get together, all the representatives from all the country, and they talk about those needs and concerns. But guess what? The president is the only person that can call all those representatives from all over the country. Hey, get back here from Hawaii. Hey, Alaska, come on down. We need you. He can call those people, and they have to come. The president is also the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. For example, when we were bombed at Pearl Harbor, the president reacted immediately. We began to send troops. We began to direct the defense of this country. We ramped up defense spending. We mobilized the armed forces. And then he called Congress into a special session. And as quickly as they could, all the representatives of this country came together and met in that big room. And the president announced in front of Congress the need for a declaration of war. And very quickly, without much deliberation, we declared war on Japan, and then Germany and Italy declared war on us, and we followed suit, and boom, there's World War II. Even though Congress wasn't in session, he called that special session. The president also receives foreign leaders. So all over the world, foreign dignitaries and leaders, presidents, kings and queens come to the United States. And that's part of keeping up our relations with other countries. And it is the job of the president and has been custom for the president's first lady to plan these events. And when you guys went to the White House, I know you didn't get to see the cool part. You didn't get to go in the Oval Office or the West Wing or any of the places where the decisions are made. The part of the White House we got to see that's open to the public is the part where foreign dignitaries are received. You saw a number of dining rooms, a number of rooms reserved for meetings. And I know that's not as exciting as like seeing where the Bay of Pigs was ordered or seeing where the Cuban Missile Crisis was decided upon. But you saw where peace has been made between countries. You saw where leaders have met with other leaders, and that's really neat. And they make treaties. This is a huge one. The Kyoto Protocols were decided in Paris by leaders and representatives of countries from all over the world, presidents and kings and queens, etc., agreed to a certain thing. And that's the right of that president to make that. Or the Paris Accords relating to climate change. Those agreements were decided by those executive offices in their respective countries. They also appoint heads of agencies. These are cabinet level positions. So let's say if Jeff Sessions, who is the Attorney General of the United States, who is the head of all law enforcement, if he decides to resign, it would be the right of the president to pick someone new. I don't know if you've heard, but a Supreme Court justice has recently announced their retirement, and currently the president has selected an appointee. And they are going through confirmation hearings in the Senate. And the president gets to pick that person. They also pick ambassadors, other officials. They can also pardon anyone in the country. They can completely set them free, or they can reduce their sentences entirely. Probably the most famous case is when Nixon was pardoned by Ford. And they also have the responsibility of keeping the public informed with the state of our country as a whole. And so every year, the president addresses the nation from Congress, that room that we were in. The president stands in front of the room, in front of the cameras, and addresses the nation in the State of the Union to discuss the important issues facing the nation. It is during this time that the president outlines plans that they have, new laws they would like to see passed that will affect the nation as a whole. Now, in terms of what is the most important presidential power, I suppose it depends on the time. Secondly, the president fills many roles that are important to the functioning of the government. Obviously, they are the chief executive, meaning that they are like the head of a company, basically. They are the head of the armed forces, and they are the legislative leader. When it comes to making laws, the president has the supreme authority in terms of making laws. Now, Congress can override that, but we've learned how that is a difficult process as well. So it is the job of the president to carry out the nation's laws. They can't do this by themselves. They have a whole cabinet devoted to this. There are millions of federal employees that answer to the executive branch. Now, an executive order is a rule or command that has the force of law. And various presidents, as I've said, through history, have tried to use this law to implement policies that they feel Congress is being too slow to act on. Lincoln wanted to end slavery. I mean, even though during the primary race in the election of 1860, he told the South, if you elect me, I will not meddle with slavery. He had already been on record saying that slavery is, quote, a vast moral evil. Everyone knew he wanted to end slavery. It was the one thing the Republican Party could agree upon at that point. But Congress, even in the midst of the Civil War, couldn't decide about the issue of slavery. I mean, the Supreme Court had just ruled in 1856 that a slave is not a person, they are a property. And finally he used his executive order to end slavery behind enemy lines, giving him the authority to set policy. Now again, lots of people argued he simply did not have that authority and called him a tyrant. And once more, through history, presidents have exercised this law to the limits of their ability. The president has the right to appoint Supreme Court justices. When Antonin Scalia passed away, he was a Supreme Court justice who passed in early 2016. President Obama appointed Merrick Garland to be his Supreme Court appointment. And it was the job of the Senate to give, again, constitutionally bound, to give Merrick Garland a confirmation hearing. And for partisan issues, the Republicans exercised they just refused to give Merrick Garland a confirmation hearing. They drug it out. They said it needs to be tied to the election. And so after the election, when a Republican won, President Trump appointed Neil Gorsuch, if I remember correctly, and he was confirmed. So it's the job of the president to appoint Supreme Court justices. That mess gets really confusing. In regards to law enforcement, pardons are a declaration of forgiveness and freedom from punishment. I'm sure you know every year the president pardons a turkey. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek, hey, ha, ha, ha. They can also pardon they can issue reprieves. That's in order to delay a punishment's execution. So if a prisoner were about to be executed and the court system was moving too slowly, and the president or even the governor can exercise this right, if not countermanded by the president, can delay that execution so that the court might hear the case once more. And then finally, they can offer amnesty as a pardon to a group of people. The president oversees and directs foreign policy. That is, they make key decisions about how our nation will act toward other countries. So, in Obama's final years as president, something he had wanted to see done for a long time, he finally felt, what's it going to hurt if I go ahead and do this? He opened relations with Cuba. Meaning that right after he did that, I had some friends who went on vacation there, and they took pictures and posted them on social media. And those were the first pictures I had seen from Cuba since the 1950s. And it was so cool. I was like, wow, color pictures of Cuba. There it is. My friends just went there. Whoa. You had ice cream in Cuba. Like Castro had ice cream there. Whoa. And it was opened up to the public for the first time since the 50s. And the president didn't have to go through Congress to do that. He did that. And granted, plenty of people complained, but that's the president's right. So, as commander-in-chief, they are the official commander of all the branches of the armed forces. Air Force, Coast Guard, Merchant Marine, Army, Navy, Marines, Space Force, maybe. But when it comes to declaring war, here's where it gets a little complicated. When bin Laden was killed in 2011, we had been hunting him since September of 2001, really even before that. And when he was killed, no one knew it was happening. The order came directly from the president at the highest levels of power. It was executed effectively. Within a few hours, bin Laden was dead, and the president addressed the nation and said, bin Laden has been killed. That event occurred in Pakistan, in a foreign country that we were not currently at war with. It made relations somewhat tense since we killed a man on their soil, ordered by the president, but he had absolutely the right to do that. Now, had he not gotten those men in and out within 48 hours, he would have been obligated to inform Congress. Had those men remained in country for 90 days, Congress would have had to agree on it, meaning a formal declaration of war. So the president has the right to send whoever, wherever, within 48 hours. But they have limits. Now, they're also the legislative leader. They can push through laws. The president is directly involved in lobbying for laws. When Johnson wanted to implement his war on poverty, which encompassed hundreds of different federal laws, then he pushed that legislation. He's also the head of state, meaning that when these foreign leaders come, so let's say the Prime Minister of Germany comes to the United States. They would like to visit. They want to see our national parks. They want to go to a baseball game. They want to experience American culture. Well, it's the job of the president to greet that dignitary, to host them at the White House. And yes, there are ceremonial functions. So there are practical functions of the president, pushing laws, running the armed forces, directing foreign policy. But there's also a ceremonial purpose of the president, meaning that, well, he's got to keep up our image. Like Chrissy said, he has to be a respectable figure because he is the representative of our country. And it's an embarrassment to the world, to our nation, when the president behaves immaturely. And then finally, in regards to the economy, the president has to plan the federal budget every year. So that is all the money that our federal government plans on spending that year, all that money. Well, it's the job of the president to sign off on that. The president plans a budget, Congress plans a budget, and the two parties have to agree upon that. Other roles. They are the leader of their party. So barring impeachment, or in the very rare instance that a party might turn their back on a sitting president, but it's unheard of, the president is going to be considered the leader of that party. So President Trump currently represents the Republican Party. Just keep that in mind. So, do you agree that issues of executive orders conflict with legislative powers? And this has been a subject of much debate. Even though yes, Lincoln had the authority to carry out the Emancipation Proclamation. There were those that sought impeachment for that. So it's a sticky matter.